The sun had barely broken over the horizon, but already the earth was warm beneath Clara Mayfield's bare feet. Her boots sat by the door, worn thin at the soles, their laces frayed and stiff with dried mud. She'd meant to patch them weeks ago, but the days never allowed her time for much beyond what was necessary to keep the land alive, and even that felt like a losing fight. She stepped out into the morning light, the sky painted in strokes of pale gold and quiet gray. A breath of wind rolled off the hills, tugging at the loose tendrils of her hair. Her cotton dress, faded blue and patched in the elbows, fluttered briefly before settling against her frame. She stood there for a moment on the porch of the tiny farmhouse, just wood and nails barely holding against time, and looked out at the field ahead, dry, cracked, stubborn. And hers. In the makeshift pen beside the house, the donkey let out a weary bray. It wasn't loud or defiant. It sounded tired, like the creature knew exactly what kind of day was ahead and didn't have the strength to protest. Clara grabbed the harness and moved toward him, whispering apologies into the dust. The animal, thin to the bone, didn't fight as she led him to the plow already stuck into the hard dirt. His ribs showed clearly beneath his mottled gray coat, and his eyes were dull, not with illness, but with the ache of repetition. They had done this yesterday, and the day before. And every day since, the thaw had made the ground pliable enough to pretend it might grow something. The plow blade scraped loudly as Clara leaned her weight into it. The donkey heaved, shoulders pulling forward as if dragging a wagon of stones. She spoke to him the way one might speak to an old friend. "I know, Jasper," she murmured. "I wouldn't want to do it either. But it's just us now. Ain't no one else coming." The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into her skin, making the sweat roll down her back in slow trails. Her hands were blistered from the rains, her arms aching. But she kept going. The soil fought back with every inch, dry roots resisting the blade, the land itself unwilling to surrender to her effort. But Clara didn't stop. She pressed on with the grim patience of someone who knew there was no one else who would do it for her. Her husband, Samuel, had died the winter before last. Fever took him in 3 days, fast and without kindness. One moment he was splitting logs with his sleeves rolled up and his smile wide. The next he was shaking under 3 blankets, whispering her name like it was a prayer he was losing. They'd buried him behind the house, near the tree line, in a small plot that had only ever held sunflowers and their first dog. Clara hadn't cried at the funeral, not because she didn't want to, but because there wasn't time. That spring, the crops had failed, the well ran low, the neighbors stopped coming by. Now it was just her, a donkey too old for labor, and a field that refused to forget what it used to be, fertile, hopeful, loved. She paused at the end of a long row, wiping her brow with a trembling hand. The donkey wheezed softly. She unhooked him and led him to a trough, where he drank slowly, dust rising from his snout with each breath. Beyond the ridge, maybe a quarter-mile out, sat the land of Thomas Braddock. She'd never spoken to him directly. She'd seen him once in town, buying seed and talking business with the general store clerk. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, hat low over his brow. People said he owned nearly 300 acres, had more horses than he needed, and could read weather from the way smoke lifted off the hills. They also said he was a fair man, but distant. Clara wasn't sure she believed in fairness anymore. She tightened her grip on the reins and went back to the plow. Far across the valley, seated atop a dark bay mare, Thomas Braddock watched from a rise in the land. He hadn't planned to stop. He was just out checking on the southern fence line, making sure the cattle hadn't pushed through again. But then, he'd seen her. The silhouette of a woman behind a plow wasn't unfamiliar. He'd seen his mother do it before his father returned from war. He'd seen women shoulder more than their share, all through hard years. But there was something in the way Clara moved, slow, steady, unwilling to yield, that made him pause. He sat still in the saddle, one hand resting against the horn. The donkey wasn't much more than bones. The plow looked like it had been welded together with scraps and rusted nails. And yet she worked. He watched as she finished a row, helped the animal drink, then turned and started again. No one helping. No hired hand. No kin. Just her. Thomas shifted in the saddle, exhaled through his nose, and glanced down the ridge. He could ride on. The southern fence line wasn't going to fix itself. But he didn't move. Instead, he watched her for what felt like a long time. The sun climbed higher. Sweat darkened her back, her arms trembled. The donkey nearly collapsed once before she caught him. Still, she pushed on. A flicker of something moved across Thomas's face. Not pity. It wasn't pity. It was something quieter, something that stirred in the space between respect and guilt. He turned his horse slowly, guiding it back toward his land, the hoofbeats muffled against the dry grass. He didn't look back, but he didn't forget what he saw. And Clara, unaware of the eyes that had been on her, finished the last row for the day with a sigh that came from the soles of her feet. Her arms hung limp at her sides as she unbuckled the harness from the donkey. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder. The animal didn't react. He was too tired. She led him back to the pen, dropped feed into a bucket, and leaned against the barn wall, letting her knees fold beneath her. The wind blew softly. From across the ridge, the tall grasses swayed like a secret being passed between strangers. That night, she lit a single oil lamp and stared at the empty chair across the table. The one Samuel had always filled. She didn't speak aloud, didn't pray. She just sat there, eyes fixed on the window, jaw clenched. Outside, the stars came out one by one, scattered across the sky like the things she had lost. Somewhere, far off on the ridge, a man lay in bed but didn't sleep, his mind tracing the image of a woman in a field, bent to a plow, unwilling to quit. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, more rows to till, more earth to fight. But change, quiet and unseen, had already begun its slow walk across the land. Clara Mayfield woke before dawn, as always, the silence of the house thick around her like a blanket that refused to warm. She swung her legs off the bed and sat still for a moment, letting her fingers rest on her knees. The wood floor creaked beneath her heel, a sound as familiar as breath. She dressed in the same faded cotton dress, brushed her hair back with her fingers, and pulled on her boots, the sole of the left one still loose, flapping a little when she walked. Outside, the world was a painting in ash blue, the moon just surrendering the sky to the day. The rooster had yet to crow, and even the breeze seemed to whisper, not speak. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her eyes adjusting to the soft light. The air was still cool, a gentle reprieve before the sun would burn its path overhead. She stretched her back, muscles sore from the day before, and turned toward the pen where the donkey slept. But her breath caught in her throat. There, tied neatly to the fence post, were two horses, strong, broad-chested, well-groomed. One a dappled gray with intelligent eyes, the other a rich chestnut with a thick mane that shimmered like brass in the pale morning light. Both wore leather harnesses, clean, well-oiled, and fitted perfectly for work. Clara blinked, thinking perhaps she was still dreaming. She stepped off the porch slowly, her boots crunching against the dry dirt path. The horses didn't flinch. They turned their heads in unison to look at her, their ears flicking, breath fogging in the cool air. There was no note, no tracks leading away, no sound of hooves retreating in the distance, just the horses. She walked up cautiously, hands out. They didn't shy away. The chestnut sniffed her fingers and nudged her wrist. She touched the smooth muscle of its neck, then turned to the gray. Its coat rippled beneath her hand, warm and steady. Clara turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing, no rider, no wagon, no sign of how they got there. She untied the ropes. The horses followed her willingly into the pen, walking beside her like they'd always known her. The donkey, still dozing in the corner, raised his head in confusion, then lowered it again with a groan. She closed the gate behind them, heart pounding, breath shallow. It had to be a mistake. Someone must have left them by accident. Or maybe she'd slept through something, some arrangement she'd forgotten, or some favor repaid she hadn't known she asked for. But there were no answers. Only the solid, living proof of something she hadn't dared hope for. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She checked her field a dozen times, glancing down the road with every wind gust, expecting someone to ride up and demand the horses back. But no one came. By mid-afternoon, when the sun was high and the sky sharp and cloudless, she gave in. She hitched them to the plow. They didn't fight the straps. Their bodies moved with practiced grace, stepping forward with the strength of real workers. Clara walked behind them, guiding the plow with hands that trembled at first, then steadied with each pass. The soil gave way like it hadn't in years. It turned over in long, beautiful lines. Smooth, even, deep. For the first time since Samuel died, Clara felt something close to control. Not survival, not stubbornness, but progress. By evening, her hands ached in a different way. Sharper, more purposeful. Her back hurt, but it wasn't from desperation. It was from the promise of a full harvest. Word spread quickly. By the next market day, she could feel the eyes on her. As she loaded sacks of grain onto her cart, a woman across the way nudged her companion, nodding toward Clara. "She's got new horses," one whispered. "Fine ones, too." "Must have been a gift," the other muttered. "Or payment." Clara kept her eyes down, lips tight. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't offer explanation. She didn't have one to give. She sold her produce, bought her flour, and walked past Thomas Braddock in front of the feed store. He stood with his arms crossed, hat shadowing his eyes. When she passed, he tipped his head slightly. "Afternoon, Miss Mayfield." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Afternoon." He didn't say more. But something in the way he looked at her made her wonder. It wasn't pity, it wasn't amusement, it was knowing. He turned back to the store, and she kept walking. That night, she stood in the doorway of the barn, watching the horses as they rested. They'd worked hard all day and still moved with power, their bodies strong and capable. She whispered a thank you to the air, not sure to whom, not God. She hadn't spoken to him in months, but to someone, somewhere. Weeks passed. The plowing went faster than it ever had. Seeds planted in clean rows, weeds pulled before they could root. The horses never faltered. Clara began to sing while she worked. Quiet songs. Nothing joyful, just melodies to fill the silence. The donkey rested more now, his work cut in half. He seemed grateful, trailing behind the new pair like a retiree content to observe. The neighbors watched, some with admiration, others with suspicion. A man in the feed store leaned close one day, voice low. "I heard Thomas Braddock's been riding that way more often." Another replied, "He ain't the type to give without reason." Clara heard it all, pretended not to. She didn't see Thomas again for weeks, but when she did, it was late afternoon. She'd finished her rows early, the horses brushed and fed. She rode into town for salt and matches. He was seated on a bench outside the saloon, chewing the end of a cigar he hadn't lit. She stopped in front of him. He looked up. "You made good use of them," he said. She blinked. "The horses?" He didn't nod, didn't confirm, just looked at her. "You work hard," he said. "That's rare." She wanted to ask, to demand answers. But something in his tone, something respectful, almost reverent, stopped her. She nodded once, then walked on. That night, as the wind picked up and the trees whispered like old women gossiping across porches, Clara lay awake. She knew it was him. She didn't know why, didn't know what he wanted, or if he wanted anything at all. But she knew. And for the first time, she didn't feel angry about needing help. She felt seen, not as a widow, not as a struggling woman, but as a farmer, someone worth investing in. The next morning she found fresh oats in a burlap sack by the barn door. Still no note, no name, but the silence now felt like kindness, not condescension. She poured the feed into the trough, watching the horses eat with contented grunts. The fields were nearly ready for planting. The land, once brittle and dead, had begun to soften under her touch. And though she didn't know what would come next, Clara stood straighter now. The weight on her shoulders had shifted, not disappeared, but changed. And far across the valley, behind the rise of the hills, Thomas Braddock stood on his porch, coffee in hand, eyes on the horizon. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't need it. But the memory of her walking behind those horses, chin up, lips pursed in determination, that stayed with him, not as a debt to be collected, but as a quiet reminder. Some people don't ask for help, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve it. And some gifts are best given in silence. The wheat had begun to show green. It was still early, nothing more than fine threads breaking the surface of the soil like cautious hope. But Clara walked the rows at dusk with her hands behind her back, boots scuffing the earth, and her eyes scanning every inch for signs of failure or promise. The air was warmer now, spring giving way to the early edge of summer, and the field smelled of dry dirt, sweat, and the faintest breath of something living. It had been almost 2 months since the horses appeared, 2 months of working twice as fast, planting deeper, sleeping better. The old donkey rested more than he moved now, content to watch from the shade. The 2 horses, she'd never named them, though she thought about it, responded to her voice as if they'd been born to listen. They moved with ease, muscle rippling beneath gleaming coats, their steps precise and patient. Every time she hitched them, she felt a pinch of disbelief that they were hers. Except they weren't, not really. She still didn't know if they were a gift, a loan, a test, or some quiet joke. But she used them all the same. Because not using them felt like throwing away mercy. And in a place like this, mercy was rare. Town had noticed. She could feel it in the sideways glances at the general store, in the quiet hush of conversation that followed her down the street. When she handed over coins for flour, the storekeeper nodded with a little more respect, but his wife, dusting the shelves behind him, didn't smile. "Got yourself new help, Clara?" someone had asked one morning. She turned to see Martha Canning, a woman who spoke as if she were doing you a favor by including your name in her mouth. "Horses, not help," Clara replied, voice even. "They look fine enough to race. They plow." Martha tilted her head. "Well, someone's certainly looking after you." Clara didn't answer. She took her sack and walked out. Behind her, she heard Martha whisper, "Doesn't say thank you, doesn't say no." That's how they get things, some women. Silence and the right face. The words landed like stones in the base of Clara's spine. She didn't turn around. Didn't let them see her stiffen, but she heard it. And later in the field, as the horses moved forward and the sun burned across her back, she couldn't shake it. Silence and the right face. It was poison in the mouth of someone who'd never had to earn her own living with her hands. She didn't ask for the horses. She hadn't begged, hadn't hinted, hadn't offered anything in return. And maybe that was the part people didn't like, the part they couldn't understand. That kindness might come unprompted. That strength might be noticed by someone with no motive. She worked harder that week, her movements sharper, jaw set. Every row plowed deeper, every seedbed pressed with care. The field began to hum with growth, the kind of quiet that only comes when things are finally going right. And then one morning she found the chestnut favoring his back leg. Not badly, not enough to panic, but enough to worry. She unhitched him and walked him in slow circles. The muscle was tight, not swollen but tender. He blinked at her, patient, trusting, but even trust couldn't hide discomfort. She put a poultice on the leg, wrapped it in clean cloth, and whispered soft nonsense while she worked. Then she fetched the old donkey, hitched him beside the gray, and started back into the field. It was slower, harder. The donkey's strength faded fast in the midday heat, and she could only plow half the field before stopping. Her arms shook. Her shirt clung wet to her back. By the third day of this rhythm, Clara felt herself fraying. She didn't pray, but that night, staring at the ceiling above her bed, she whispered, "I can't lose them too." She didn't say who she meant. Not out loud. The next morning, before the rooster crowed, she stepped out onto the porch and stopped. There, at the same fence post, was another horse. Dark bay, tall, with a white blaze down its nose, tied with the same kind of rope. No note, no sound of departure. Just waiting. Clara closed her eyes. She opened them again. Still there. She walked toward it, heart pounding. The horse shifted its weight, but didn't bolt. Its eyes were steady, ears flicking in her direction. The chestnut was still limping. Not badly, but he needed rest. She reached out, untied the rope, and led the new horse into the pen. Her hands trembled, not from fear, not from excitement, but from the weight of gratitude with no place to land. That day the field moved again. Smooth rows, even ground. The donkey rested, the chestnut grazed. And the whispers returned, louder. In town they waited until she passed to speak. "She's got 3 now. Must be something going on." "Braddock's land runs right past hers, doesn't it?" "Quiet, man, but quiet doesn't mean clean." "Maybe she visits at night." She didn't flinch, but she heard every word. And when she saw Thomas Braddock the next week, outside the blacksmith's shop, she didn't walk past. She stopped, looked him straight in the eyes. "Was it you?" He didn't pretend, didn't dodge. His face was calm. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He looked past her, toward the road, then back. "You work harder than most men I know." "I had horses that weren't being used. Figured they'd earn their worth better with you." Her jaw clenched. "They're not charity." "No." He nodded. "They're recognition." She stared at him, throat tight. "You should have said something. The town thinks—" "I don't care what the town thinks," he said quietly. "Do you?" She looked down at her calloused hands. "No," she said, "but I care what they say." He stepped forward once, not close, just enough to lower his voice. "Let them talk. Let them wonder. They talked before you had horses. They'll talk when you harvest more than they ever did." She didn't answer. He nodded again and stepped away. That night, Clara took her dinner outside, sitting on the porch as the horses shifted in the paddock and the sky turned violet above them. She watched them, watched the field, watched the wind roll over the wheat. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something loosened. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore. But the next time she was in town, she bought a pair of ribbons, one red, one gold. She braided them into the manes of the horses. Not for vanity, not for show, but for defiance. And when Martha Canning passed her on the street, lips pursed and eyes narrowed, Clara smiled, wide, proud, unashamed, because mercy might come in silence, but dignity didn't have to whisper. The wind had shifted. Clara noticed it before the skies changed, before the clouds rolled in, before the animals stirred in their pens, before the first heavy gust slapped against the side of the barn. She felt it in her skin as she bent down among the rows of wheat, checking the base of a young stalk. The breeze carried something different, something wild. And the air, which had been dry for weeks, now carried the heavy breath of coming rain. By mid-morning, the sky had turned a pale gray. By noon, it was iron. She left the horses hitched under the awning, made sure the donkey was inside the shed, and began hauling tools into the barn. Her shirt clung to her back, her boots heavy with dust and sweat, but she didn't stop moving. Storms this time of year didn't whisper. They came howling, dragging half the land with them. She'd only just slammed the barn doors shut when the wind struck hard enough to rattle the hinges. Rain didn't fall so much as roar. It came sideways, sweeping across the field like a stampede. The wheat bent low, some of it flattening under the force. Clara watched from the window with clenched fists and grit in her teeth. The field she'd carved from dust and silence, now disappearing under a curtain of gray. And then came the lightning. Forks of white split the sky. Thunder chased behind like gunfire. The animals inside shifted and snorted. One of the horses kicked at the wall. Another reared briefly, eyes wide. She moved among them, voice low, hands out, keeping them calm. "It's all right," she whispered. "Just a storm. We've seen worse." But not quite like this. It went on for hours. Rain slammed the roof like falling fists. The wind howled through the cracks in the barn walls. A shingle tore loose and landed with a sharp clap outside. The chestnut horse kicked again, hard enough to jolt the beam behind it. Then, sudden silence. The eye passed over them. She stepped outside to a strange stillness. The sky was yellow-gray, swollen, the earth soaked and steaming. Her field, mud. Whole sections flattened, seeds washed from their rows, trenches carved by runoff. And then the second wave came. Wind in reverse, rain harder, thunder closer, and amid the violence, an awful sound, a sharp, panicked whinny from the barn. Clara turned and ran. Inside, the bay horse was thrashing, rope snapped, eyes wild. The chestnut had fallen, leg twisted, body heaving against the wall. No, 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 no. She dropped to her knees beside him. His flank trembled. His breaths came shallow. She pressed her hands against his chest, speaking low, barely breathing. But the truth was there in his eyes. He couldn't rise. He wouldn't. The leg was broken. She didn't cry. She stood, walked to the shelf, and took down the small box from the highest beam. Inside, her late husband's revolver, polished, clean, loaded. She turned back. The chestnut looked at her without fear, only trust. She stepped outside into the rain, lifted the gun, and ended it before the lightning could crack again. She buried him the next morning. The storm passed, but the clouds lingered. Her field looked like a battlefield. Half the wheat was gone. The rest lay bruised and uncertain. Her hands were raw. Her heart was heavier than it had been in months. She sat on the porch, staring at nothing, eyes burning from a night without sleep. When the wagon rolled up, she didn't hear it at first. Only when the creak of the wheels grew louder did she turn her head. Thomas Braddock stood at the gate. He didn't say a word, just nodded once, then reached back and untied the lead rope. Another horse stepped down, a gelding this time. Dark gray. Quiet eyes. Clara didn't rise. Thomas approached slowly, rope in hand. "I heard about the storm," he said. She looked at the horse, then back at him. "You heard right. Thought you might need this one. Another favor?" He shifted his weight, voice even. "Not a favor. A replacement for what was lost." She stood then, walked down the steps, met him face to face. "They're talking again. I know. They think you think I." Her voice caught. "They think I'm being bought." He didn't flinch. "I don't care what they think." "Well, I do." "You shouldn't." She looked past him, toward the field, the barn, the grave. "I didn't ask for your help." "No. But I didn't say no either." He stepped closer, voice quieter. "Would you rather I stop?" She met his eyes. No, then looked away. "But I can't keep taking like this. Not without giving something back." "You already have." "What?" "You showed me something I forgot to believe in." She shook her head. "That sounds like a line." "It's not. You worked a field with a dying donkey. You didn't fold. That kind of grit. It sticks." They stood in silence for a long moment. The wind lifted the edges of her dress. The gray horse stamped a hoof, restless. "I buried him myself," she said. "I figured you would." I didn't cry. "You don't have to." Clara turned then and took the rope from Thomas's hand. The horse followed her easily. She didn't say thank you, not with words. But when she looked back and he met her eyes again, he nodded. And that was enough. The town noticed, of course. They always did. The next week, Clara rode in with the gray gelding and left the general store with 2 full sacks of grain and a bolt of new fabric. She passed Martha Canning without a word. The gossip doubled. Some said Braddock had proposed. Others swore they saw her on his porch after sundown. None of it was true, except the part about the porch. She did sit there, once, a week after the storm. He'd invited her for coffee. Not as a transaction, not as a secret, just coffee. They sat in silence, watching the stars. Neither spoke much. He didn't touch her. She didn't lean in. But something passed between them, something neither of them needed to name. The days rolled on. The wheat recovered. Some of it, not all. But enough to sell, enough to feed the animals, enough to plant again. Clara kept working. Thomas kept watching, not hovering, not smothering, but present, like a tree at the edge of a field. Steady, not needing to be the center, but always there. When the town's harvest festival came, Clara didn't attend. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood at the edge of her field, arms crossed, staring at the place where the new growth had taken hold. The ribbons in the horses' manes flapped gently in the breeze. She'd survived. Again, and not because she'd been saved, but because someone had seen her and chose not to look away. The first frost came early. It swept in before the calendar had time to turn, dusting the edges of Clara Mayfield's field in silver while the wheat still stood half-cut, bundles resting like sleeping dogs in the rows. The air had turned thin, sharp enough to sting her knuckles, and the sun came up slower now, peeking over the ridge with less certainty than before. She was up before it, as always, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoing louder in the cold morning. Her breath fogged as she pulled on her boots and coat. The seams were wearing at the shoulders, and she'd meant to stitch it proper, but the fabric felt like old hands, familiar, worn, still doing the job. Outside, the barn groaned as the wind passed through. The horses, tucked in and fed, stamped their hooves in the straw. They were thicker now, winter coats growing in, each one sleek and strong. The new gray gelding nuzzled her shoulder when she passed, and she paused to press her forehead gently against its neck. A moment. A ritual. A thanks. Then she stepped out and looked across her field. A line of smoke rose in the distance. It was coming from Braddock's land. She didn't think much of it at first. Everyone burned brush this time of year. But an hour later, when she was out behind the house repairing a cracked water line, she heard the hoofbeats. Slow, steady. No wagon, just one horse. She wiped her hands on a rag and stood, heart already knowing. Thomas Braddock sat in the saddle, shoulders hunched against the wind. His face looked the same as it always did, quiet, unreadable, but there was something in the way he didn't dismount right away that made her blood slow in her veins. She walked to the gate, wrapped her fingers around the top rail. He finally spoke. "I need to ask you something." She didn't answer, just waited. "There's a boy," he said. "Kin of a cousin. Mother passed. Father useless. Been wandering. Broke into one of my sheds. Took food. Thought I'd run him off. But he's just a kid." Still she waited. "He's 15, Thomas continued, half wild, but strong. Doesn't talk much. Thought you might." She frowned. "What, take him in?" "No, not that. Just give him something to do. A place to work. He won't talk to my hands. But he saw you at market last week. Asked if you were the one with the horses." She crossed her arms. "You don't bring people into other people's lives like you bring horses to a fence post." "I know. Then why ask?" "Because I figured if he was going to learn anything worth learning, it'd be better from someone who earned everything they had with no one watching." That silenced her. She hated how easily his words found the soft spots. An hour later, the boy arrived. Skinny, with dark hair chopped at uneven lengths, boots too big, jacket too small. He didn't meet her eyes. Carried a pack with a tin plate, a dull knife, and a Bible so worn the pages curled at the edges. She fed him first. Didn't ask his name. He watched the horses while he chewed. When she offered him a pitchfork and pointed to the stall, he nodded and went without complaint. That evening, Clara found him asleep in the hayloft, curled beside the donkey like they'd always known each other. She left him there, pulling the barn doors closed against the cold. 3 weeks passed. The boy, whose name was Eli, she learned eventually, spoke little, worked hard, listened more than he needed to. The horses took to him. The land, too. He planted where she pointed, shoveled without being told. And once, when a fence post gave way under the weight of wind, he fixed it without her asking. In town, the rumors changed again. She's raising a son now? Braddock's, maybe? Maybe she lost one. Maybe this is her penance. Clara stopped listening. Her field was recovering. Her hands were full. Her heart was quieter. She still met Thomas's eyes when they passed in town, still sat on his porch some evenings, the silence between them saying more than most could handle. Then, one night, the boy didn't come in for supper. She found him standing at the edge of the pasture, staring up at the stars like he was waiting for something to fall. She walked over and stood beside him. The cold seeped through her coat, but neither moved. Finally he said, "Why'd you take me in?" She looked straight ahead. "Because the horses didn't get here on their own." He turned his head, eyes narrowing. "I don't get it. You will." He didn't speak again, but the way he walked back to the house beside her, closer now, slower, said enough. That winter was hard. The snow came heavy, the firewood burned fast, and the roof needed patching 3 times. But there was food, there was warmth, there was laughter. Quiet, rare, but real. Clara taught Eli how to bake cornbread, how to read weather by the smell of the air, how to mend leather with your fingers instead of tools. And one day, while repairing a plow blade, she looked up to find Thomas at the gate again. He didn't bring a horse this time, just himself. She wiped her hands and waited as he approached. "I came to ask something else." She smirked. "Another orphan?" "No, this one's about me." He looked nervous. She liked that. "I don't have much," he said, "but I've got quiet mornings. And coffee. And a porch that's colder without you on it." She tilted her head. "That your idea of a proposal?" "No. My idea of a question, would you want to sit there a little more often, maybe not just as neighbors?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him, toward the gate, then looked back over her shoulder. "Well, you bringing the coffee, or am I?" He smiled for the first time in years. That spring, Clara's field bloomed faster than it ever had. Eli built a second coop. The horses grew fat and proud. And one morning, when the wheat was swaying like water, Clara stood in the middle of it, arms out, eyes closed. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The wind knew. The land knew. She had plowed alone. But she would never walk alone again. And so, from a lone widow with nothing but a bony donkey and unshakable will, Clara Mayfield built a life rooted in quiet strength, unspoken kindness, and love that needed no words. Through storms, whispers, and hardship, she proved that dignity doesn't ask for permission, and that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in silence. If stories of resilience, frontier romance, and the untamed spirit of the West stir something in your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles. Saddle up and ride with us through more unforgettable tales where love blooms in the dust and courage rides tall. Hit that bell so you never miss the next chapter of the Heartland.